You must remember this. A kiss is just a kiss. A sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by.
Hello and welcome to the second episode of A Woman Robbed, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is, where we talk about actresses who may have come close to earning Oscar nominations but were ultimately overlooked or omitted or for one reason or another just didn't have the votes to make it into the final lineup, and discuss why they may have deserved to get in and why they ultimately didn't. Each episode has its own theme, with a double feature like this, and this week we will be discussing two performances from women who were in the Best Picture winner of their year, but weren't even nominated for Best Actress. And joining me today to help me break down two such cases is one of the best in the biz, talking about films and Oscars and actresses, especially the two women that we'll be discussing today. She's been on this show quite a few times, most recently talking the 1936 Best Actress lineup, where we raved over Carole Lombard. She is the mind behind the great YouTube channel Be Kind Rewind. Please welcome back to the show, Izzy.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, truly. I'm also very excited to be talking about these two women with you because you have specifically done videos on the two of them. So I feel like I'm talking with a real expert on both of them here.
Yeah, when you reached out to me about these two specifically, I was like, oh, hell yeah.
Yes.
It's game time. Let's do it.
Wow. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Well, let's get right into it. So just to set the table, I presented to my patrons here at The Runner-Up is a list of the 13 times that actresses who were the leads or co-leads of Best Picture winners did not score a Best Actress nomination, and sort of asking them to vote on their top two favorites. And just to go through the list, we had Clara Bow in Wings, Greta Garbo in Grand Hotel, Jean Arthur in You Can't Take It With You, Maureen O'Hara in How Green Was My Valley, Ingrid Bergman in Casablanca, Myrna Loy in The Best Years of Our Lives, Leslie Caron in An American in Paris, Betty Hutton in The Greatest Show on Earth, Leslie Caron again, sorry Leslie, in Gigi, Natalie Wood in West Side Story, Susanna York in Tom Jones, Audrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady, and fast forward 60 years later, Emilia Jones in Coda. And the two winners were Ingrid Bergman in Casablanca and Myrna Loy in The Best Years of Our Lives. So that is who we will be talking about today. So, before we talk about these performances individually, would love to know if you had any kind of introductory thoughts on Bergman and Loy, what your feelings are on the two of them, and also whether you had any perspective maybe on this very specific sort of phenomenon of women who were in the Best Picture winner, but that love for some reason just didn't extend to them also being nominated.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with that one. I mean, I think what's interesting about the correlation between Best Actress and Best Picture is how little it corresponds to Best Picture in general compared to some of the other acting categories. So you often have women who win for things that weren't nominated at all. It is essentially just a showcase for their performance, and that's the only thing anyone cares about with that film. And that happens quite often. And so it's interesting to kind of look at this from the other side of it, which is, we have a picture here that people absolutely love and respect, but for some reason, these performances are being overlooked, and we're thinking about the other things that make them prominent, like their screenplay or their direction or something like that. Not sure exactly why that is. I mean, I think with these two specifically, I would guess that there are very different reasons for the two of them why they were snubbed in these cases. Myrna Loy specifically having continuous troubles getting recognition from the Academy. Ingrid Bergman, not so much. But yes, I love both of these women dearly. I respect them for different reasons. Myrna Loy, I think, is a very fearless, kind of outspoken political person who also just seems very lovely and was a, not peerless maybe, but excellent comedic figure in the 1930s. And I just am obsessed with her films from that time. And Ingrid Bergman, I think somewhat similarly, I respect her for her fearlessness and just how she truly wanted to push herself and was dedicated to her craft and just kind of came into Hollywood like a whirlwind and took everybody by storm with her smile. And I just think it's pretty magical. She's a great actress. So love them both. And I'm sad neither of them were nominated for these roles.
Yeah. I also love Ingrid Bergman and Myrna Loy, so I want to say thank you to my patrons for choosing these two. And much like when I talked about Tilda Swinton and Amy Adams on the previous episode of this show, I do actually find some parallels here, not only with these two actresses, but these two performances and films in general. Obviously, they're both in films from the mid-40s, so we're talking about a very specific time here. But I think you also see with both of them how, you know, they may not be the number one leads of their films in terms of screen time and presence, I guess, but they're also such indelible parts of both of their films, and I think a reason why both of them work as well as they do, these films, and are still remembered, is because of them. And if you didn't have the presence of either Ingrid Bergman or Myrna Loy, I think they would both feel a little unbalanced as films. I think Casablanca would be a little too cynical, maybe, and I think The Best Years of Our Lives would be very male-focused, which is, it already is to a certain extent, but to not have that balance of, you know, the home front of seeing what Myrna Loy's character is feeling in that moment. It would feel like you weren't telling the whole story there. So that's why both of these performances I'm very excited to be talking about today, because I think you're also seeing how just because they didn't get Oscar nominations, it doesn't mean that they didn't have a huge impact, and possibly more impact than most of the nominees that did end up getting nominated.
True.
Yes. So yeah, let's get right into it, starting with, in chronological order here, Ingrid Bergman in Casablanca.
There's so much at stake. All you can think of is your own feeling. One woman has hurt you and you take your revenge on the rest of the world. You're a coward and weakling. No, Richard, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but you are our last hope. If you don't help us, Victor Laszlo will die in Casablanca.
What of it? I'm going to die in Casablanca. It's a good spot for it.
So we've already covered Ingrid Bergman pretty extensively from her early Hollywood years on the main show, so I don't need to go into too much detail of her background, but 1943 was a really big year for her. She had made that leap to Hollywood just a few years prior with Intermezzo, and she was very much in demand, and that led to her getting her first Oscar nomination this very same year as Casablanca for the film For Whom the Bell Tolls, which we talked about on the show. Not a performance I love, but she really fought to play that part, way more so than with Casablanca, which we might talk about too. Despite this, you know, being her most well-known film all these years later, she actually wasn't all that interested in Casablanca to start. Neither was Humphrey Bogart, but they obviously made it work, and the film won Best Picture, and it's still kind of hailed as one of the best films of all time. So, do we need a background on Casablanca? I don't know. Most people have seen it, but just to set the table, it tells the story of Rick, who's this owner of a nightclub in Casablanca in Morocco, which is this hot spot for clients all over the world, especially during World War II when this is taking place. And Rick is eventually in possession of these papers that would allow refugees to move freely across Europe. And then in walks Laszlo, a resistance leader, with his wife Ilsa, played by Ingrid Bergman, who they need such papers. And as it turns out, Ilsa has a past with Rick because they were lovers in Paris together during a time when she thought that Laszlo had died. And when she found out he hadn't, she just straight up abandoned him, which left him very cynical and cold. And the film explores how the two of them start to rekindle their relationship. So let's talk about Ingrid Bergman here. I know just from following you on Instagram, you're a big fan of the Ingrid Bergman, Isabella Rossellini family lineage.
Yeah, I sure am.
What are your thoughts just on her, just beyond what you said in the intro on Ingrid Bergman as a performer and her enduring role here in Casablanca?
Yeah, so I think Casablanca is one of my favorite performances of Ingrid Bergman's because I think she is so excellent in a close-up, and this film, Michael Curtiz does such a good job with her, you know, kind of lighting her and letting her face do a lot of the talking in this film. There are scenes, you know, when she's listening to Sam play the piano and her eyes just kind of like get that 100-yard stare. And like this is a woman who's thinking about something that's happened to her in the past, and she's very burdened by it. And I think the way that Ingrid Bergman conveys that is just so beautiful and so touching. I think what's also under discussed with Ingrid Bergman is how she can kind of do like the very deep suffering of a woman in this situation. So when she's kind of breaking down in Rick's arms, you believe that she's in immense pain. But then there are the flashbacks where she does just seem like this very carefree, in love woman, and it's just equally as believable. It's just a great role for her to kind of show that she has this sort of magical charisma about her that makes you believe that these men would be so in love with her. But she also can touch these very tragic places in her work, and the way that she kind of plays with both sentiments is wonderful. And obviously a lot of her roles kind of exploit that relationship, but I think this is just a fabulous example. Obviously it's so well written that there's a million different ways you could interpret the character, but I think that's one of the good parts about it. So
yeah, for sure. I think Ingrid Bergman is wonderful just in general, but especially here. I saw that prompt going around Twitter the other day about like what's the best a person has ever looked in a film. And watching this again, like it's hard to argue just like how the light catches her in this movie.
Yes.
It's like it really highlights her beauty and also just, you know, her kindness, her vulnerability. And as superficial as that all is, you know, I do think it is important to have someone as striking as her in this role to really, I guess, sort of sell the doomed romance aspect of it, and to show why, you know, if most of the film is from Rick's perspective to a certain extent, why someone like Ilsa leaving him behind all those years ago would just have such a seismic effect on him that would leave him so jaded, you know? And she brings that sort of timeless beauty to it, I think, but she also doesn't really think of herself in that light, or at least that's not how she projects as an actress. She doesn't project like arrogance or self-satisfaction or any sort of, you know, cynicism really, which provides that great counterbalance to Rick, you know. And I think that there is that element to her performance that is helped by the lighting and the close-ups and the way she's framed. But I also really find her to be really conscious of her character, for as much as she didn't seem to have a lot of enthusiasm for it in particular, at least compared to For Whom the Bell Tolls. She really seems to know that Elsa as a character is kind of uncertain. She doesn't really know what she wants or who she wants, you know. She's just trying to figure her shit out, and it just so happens to have these kind of big stakes for her and her husband, and I guess she brings that like cautiousness and that unpredictability too when she starts to really drive the action towards the middle to the end. Like when she's got a gun, like what is she gonna do? Even she might not know, you know, but it's not too overdone either. I think she really threads the needle, you know, and shows her to be someone who's kind of just living from moment to moment, even if it means sometimes there's some collateral damage along the way. So I think, I don't know about you, but for like, as much as she's beloved for this performance, I still kind of find it to be kind of underrated in the sense that she's asked to make sense of a character who can sometimes just kind of go wherever the wind blows and can have those interpretations, like you said, but she still makes it work.
Yeah, I think a lot of these challenges might have just come from the way that this film was made, in the sense that they were still writing the ending as they were filming the ending.
Right.
I don't think anybody actually knew what was going to happen, you know, the next day that they arrived to set. And I think it's a real credit to Ingrid Bergman that she sort of accepted that chaotic energy that was going on behind the scenes. And instead of kind of throwing up her hands and being like, whatever, I'll just read what they give me and who cares, we'll move on. She kind of, I think, intuits that kind of ambiguity can be a part of the character, and that ambiguity actually would serve the story in a way. So I think a lot of that has to do with how smart she is. I mean, when you listen to Ingrid Bergman talk, she's extremely thoughtful and curious and very intellectual. If you saw the documentary about her, the way that she writes is just so thorough and interesting. And so I just feel like she must have been able to kind of figure out that maybe this can actually help her, not knowing what they're doing the next day. That's exactly how Ilsa would have felt not knowing what they're doing the next day. So
Right.
it's interesting.
And it reminds me of what we talked about on the 1960 episode, talking about Shirley MacLaine in the apartment, which is a similar situation of them not really knowing how this is going to end, and how she kind of, like, in a way that sort of helped in her performance and making that feel very in the present and moment to moment, and in that sense kind of aiding in the performance. So I think, there's some similarities there. I read the biography by Charlotte Chandler about Ingrid Bergman actually last year, and there's this great quote from Ingrid herself and her interpretation of the character and the decision she makes later in the film. It's kind of made for her, but where she says, "I have to speak for Ilsa because it was Ilsa who chose. There was no other possibility. None. Ilsa did the only thing she could do. She believed in duty and responsibility. She could not flee her destiny. The problem was that Ilsa could never be perfectly happy, only imperfectly happy. Whichever man she chose, she would always have thought about the other."
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that does speak to, because they did also film a different ending completely and kind of just decided afterwards which would work better for the film. And I kind of feel like either way she plays it, it sort of makes sense. Like, in a different situation and different universe, like, there's a different life path she could choose here, and that would make sense for her in that universe, and this makes sense for her in this current universe. Not to get too heady about it, but I think either way she plays it, it works.
Absolutely. I think there's sort of like a propagandistic aspect of her going with Laszlo that kind of makes more sense for the time period or what audiences might have been more interested in. But I think there's always going to be a subconscious or maybe not so subconscious hope or wish on behalf of audiences to see her kind of end up with Rick in the end.
Of course. And that's what makes the kind of doomed romance of it all so, romantic, I guess.
Yeah.
But just to sort of loosely go through some of the plot and pinpoint a few scenes for her, because I do think she kind of makes every scene that she's in really count. Even from the beginning, where I think her first line, I wrote down, she said, "Victor, I feel somehow we shouldn't stay here." Very nervous, very on guard, and already kind of loaded with this hidden meaning that we don't quite know yet. And the same thing with when she talks with Sam, the piano player, and just kind of wistfully saying, "It's been a long time." And that sort of downturned look she gives when Sam says that Rick has a girl now, and she just says he's not a good liar and all that. And then her telling him to play as time goes by, again, loaded with meaning as she's listening to him. And the way that the camera is just trained on her face as she's just being transported back to those sort of past memories, it really feels like it's hard to divorce myself from just knowing what this story is, because I've watched this many times now. But I feel like even at that very early point, you can still feel the meaning and the depth there, even if you don't know the full story yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and one of the first things she does, even before her first line, is that she makes eye contact with Sam.
Yes.
And so maybe within the first 5 seconds of knowing who she is, they kind of give her a very unceremonious entrance into the movie. Yeah. There are several points where they, announce her arrival in the room with like a very dramatic door opening or like the lighting changes or whatever. But when she first enters, it's kind of like, oh, she's just suddenly there.
Yeah.
But then she makes that eye contact and it's like, oh, damn, like we need to pay attention to this because something's going on.
Yeah. On this rewatch, I had remembered that she didn't come in until 20 or so minutes in here. And then, so I wasn't fully paying attention until she arrived because of these purposes. And then just suddenly she's there, just sitting in the booth there. And I'm like, oh, she's here. Okay.
There she is.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an interesting choice. Yeah.
I do think, but I know exactly what you mean. And I think there's the other scene that really demonstrates her kind of ability to do many things at once, just kind of with her face, is when Rick asks her if they want to get married. And she's not sure really how to answer. She's kind of like, oh yeah, we'll be together forever. And she's just kind of lying to his face.
Yeah.
But there's like 7 emotions on her face at this one time. Like you can tell that she's lying, but she is so sad to be lying, and you can tell that she still really loves him.
Thank you for listening to this preview of A Woman Robbed, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup.is and become a patron. Only $3 a month will get you access to bonus episodes and early access to regular episodes. Thank you so much for your consideration.